Hello, welcome to Diving Deeper Discussions. We're part of the American Scientific Affiliation. I'm your host, Randy Isaac, and we're here to discuss articles published in Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith, which is the journal of the ASA. So today we do a retrospective. We're going back and looking at articles that have been published in the past before we started this particular discussion series and didn't have a chance to discuss it previously. And so we will discuss it now. And we're very happy to go back to the September 2019 issue, which was devoted to issues of astronomy and cosmology. And the lead invitational essay for that was the primary paper here. And it was written by astronomer Susan Benecchi. And we're absolutely delighted to have Susan with us today. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. So you wrote that a few years ago. I hope you haven't forgotten everything, but we'll get you all straightened out here a little bit. So I take it doesn't quite look like Washington, D.C. in your background, but I think you work out of D.C. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in Northern Virginia, about, an hour and a half from Goddard, if you had traffic. I know there are a number of you in this area. But yeah, the picture was taken at Las Campanas Observatory, which is a observatory in Chile, and supposed to be observing, but we had a snowstorm instead. So the picture was the result of that.
Yes. So weather can block telescopes all over the world, right? Yeah. Now, is DC where you're from? Is that where you were born and raised?
No, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. And so I was always had a nice sky, which is part of what got me into astronomy.
Oh, really? Well, tell us a little bit more about that. So you grew up over there. Have you always wanted to be an astronomer as a little girl?
Yeah, so I grew up in Arizona. We moved there when I was about 2. And I just always loved the fact that, there was a clear sky overhead. My parents took me to the Grand Canyon when I was, 5 or 6. And my dad gave me a flashlight and said, thought I'd look at the path instead. And I apparently looked up and said, Daddy, what's that? For all the different things that were in the night sky. The Grand Canyon's always been a special place in our family. And of course, the bottom is a great place to, block out lights and see the sky. I had an opportunity when I was in 6th grade. We were, like in elementary school, they give you reports that you're supposed to do. We were studying the planets, and we were supposed to pick a planet to do a project on. And so I was interested in Pluto. For whatever reason, I was always interested in small bodies in the outer solar system. Mm-hmm. And Clyde Tombaugh at the time was visiting the Planetary Planetarium, which was at the University of Arizona campus, not too far away. And so I had the opportunity to go down there and meet him. And he told his story about his discovery of Pluto. Wow. And, I got a signed poster from him and everything. And I was just always interested in astronomy. I'm one of those weird people that sort of started with a subject and continued with it. In high school, I had an opportunity to do an internship program. So I was paired up at the University of Arizona with astronomer Larry Lebowski and Don McCarthy in the astronomy group there. And then was able to go later to work at Lowell Observatory where Pluto was discovered. So it's sort of been a long trajectory, but a fun path.
So did you go to school at University of Arizona then?
I did. I did my undergraduate at the University of Arizona in physics, astronomy, and religious studies. And then I did my graduate work with Jim Elliott at MIT.
Wait a minute. What did I hear you say? Did I hear you say you majored in physics, astronomy, and religious studies?
Correct.
Wait a minute. I thought you said University of Arizona.
I did.
Wow. How did that work out?
I was double majoring in physics and astronomy, and it was traditional, maybe not traditional, but it was common at that time for people to take 5 years to go through to get their, a double degree like that. And in most universities, you have to take a bunch of general education courses. And I tracked all of those to be in the religious studies or Judaic studies departments. Neither one of them did I know existed when I started there, but they existed. And so by the time I got to my 5th year, I realized that I just needed to take like 2 other courses to double or to triple the degree. And so I had an interest for a while in doing mission work. And so I figured that taking courses, in different religions, understanding where people are coming from. A lot of times that's a great way to start a conversation or to, know somebody's background a little bit more. And so that was sort of a separate trajectory. God took me in the direction of graduate school instead of seminary, but those were two options that I had looked at.
That's terrific. I haven't met too many people who majored in physics, astronomy, and religious studies. But that's cool. So is that where you did your graduate work as well?
No, I did my graduate work in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow. How'd you risk coming all the way to the East Coast?
So while I was interning at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Dr. James Elliott was on sabbatical there, and I was working with Mark Bowie, who studies Pluto, but Jim decided that he wanted me as a graduate student, and so he pursued me and convinced me to go to Massachusetts. So,
okay. Now, while you were over here, did you by any chance get to meet Owen Gingrich, ASA fellow?
So I don't know that Owen and I have ever actually met each other, but we've crossed paths a lot. Owen contributed to the textbooks that I've co-authored with Gladys Coeur, who's also on this telecon. And he's also part of our Christian Astronomers mailing list. So he's part of the board of that. So,
but then he headed that panel to demote Pluto. You must have been appalled.
Actually, I've kind of stayed away from that whole discussion. I work with Alan Stern on the New Horizons mission, and he, of course, has strong feelings about Pluto's planetary ship, planet ships. I actually find, from a teaching perspective, it's a really interesting discussion to have with students, and from a teach the scientific method and sort of how do things develop historically, as well as what do you learn about objects scientifically. It's just a really interesting sort of topic for discussion.
Interesting. The controversy kind of makes it an educational opportunity, show the difference in what's going on then.
That's correct.
Oh, that's great. So after you got your degree at Cambridge, where did you go from there?
I spent 3 years at Space Telescope Science Institute working with Keith Knoll on binary Kuiper Belt objects and Kuiper Belt objects in general. So the Kuiper Belt is the outer edge of our solar system. So objects like Pluto, but most of them are smaller. So I was part of a number of discovery teams, both in my graduate work and postgraduate work. I spent 3 years at Space Telescope, and then I spent 3 years at the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism at Carnegie Institute here in the DC area. And now I work from home through Planetary Science Institute.
Oh, okay. Is that where you got to meet Jennifer Wiseman? She tells me she knows you quite well.
Yeah, she was at Goddard, and Keith was interning, or not interning. He was on sabbatical, I guess. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he did a sabbatical, and I ended up, interacting with people at Goddard. And so, yes, Jennifer has both been at Goddard as well as at Space Telescope.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah. So Jennifer tells me you're I think a leader or a key role in the Christian Astronomers group. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So the Christian Astronomers group used to be a lot more active when there were active meetings going on. But basically, it's a mailing list that I maintain. We have just a spreadsheet of people around the world, and the idea is to connect astronomers, Christian astronomers, with each other. To be able to have conversations of varying different, levels, and also to reach out to students. So, when students are looking for what university might I go to, or I'm interested in studying this or whatever, it's an opportunity for us to connect them with like-minded people.
Right. And then you moved into teaching. I think you said you're doing some online teaching now.
Yeah, I've always had a passion for teaching. I did some undergraduate teaching and graduate teaching. And then when I was postdocing at DTM, one of my graduate advisors, not Jim, but Rick Binzel, emailed me and said, they're starting this new homeschool program online. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in teaching with them. They want a physics course, but they want a Christian component. They want a discussion about science and faith as part of the class. And so we started the school in 2009 when I started with them. Took the first year, basically was just developing sort of the class. We didn't have any students, started with high school only. And then now it's expanded to K through 12. About 4 years ago, I introduced the astronomy class when Gladys and I and
oh yes, I see.
Finished the textbook. Yeah.
I remember Gladys sent me the manuscript of this book.
Yeah, we're actually almost finished with the second edition.
You're in the second edition now?
We're working on finishing up the second edition. And actually, I'm guessing there are a number of people on this webinar. I don't see all the faces and names, but there are a number of people who I've seen here who have contributed interviews for the textbook. So again, the idea is to inspire the younger generation of Christian students to, be willing to go into these STEM fields, to be willing to encounter that science-faith dialogue.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, great to hear that. Yeah, I remember flipping through that manuscript and I went, whoa, this was never available when I was in high school. It was really comprehensive. And by the way, there are probably a lot of people on here who don't know about it. What's the name of this? What can you just plug
of the textbook or the school?
The book.
The book. It's called Astronomy from a Christian Worldview, and we've self-published, but it's available at a number of different locations online. So basically, the first 5 chapters of the book deal with worldview. So they walk you through what is a worldview, how do science and faith interact in that idea of worldview. How do you dialogue with people of different persuasions? And then how do you build a solid, a logically sound argument, not necessarily to argue with someone, but to respectfully agree or disagree so that, you're respected and they understand where you're coming from and that you can also share your faith. The second half of the textbook is astronomy. It's based in an old Earth framework, although there are discussions throughout that I have with my students because my class is typically, I'd say it's about sort of quarter young Earth, quarter old Earth, and sort of half that are sort of ambivalent or just have never even considered it.
It's probably middle.
Yeah. But anyway, so the rest of it is a traditional astronomy textbook. It's got, there are exercises in there. And then we've scattered throughout that part of the book interviews with people, most of them from the Christian Astronomers mailing list, who are willing to share their testimony with us, what they're working on, and, sort of how they've dealt with the sort of their faith walk throughout their experience.
And I'll let you have one more ad here. What's the name of the school? I missed the name of the school you're working with. Yeah,
it's called Freedom Project Academy. It's based in Appleton, Wisconsin, and we have it's K through 12.
Oh, that's fantastic! Really, really excited about the work that you're doing. But now let's get down to business on this article. How did it come about that you wrote this? You've told us that you've got quite a background in astronomy, quite a background for religious studies and connections. So I understand your role there. But why did you write this article?
So I think it's due to Jennifer Weissman, actually, who I got pinged for this. Anyway, I got contacted by Jim Peterson, who was the editor for the journal, I believe, and was asked if I would consider basically editing an article that would do sort of an overview of discoveries in astronomy over time. With the bent towards, thinking about how to interact with our faith. And so basically that's sort of what I did. I sort of introduced those ideas and then I sort of looked at it from a variety of perspectives, humans interaction, with various scientific discoveries, going to the moon, going to Mars, those sorts of things. People are sort of thinking about life in various situations. And then I sort of tracked some of the historical discoveries, some of the interesting places in our solar system that, have sort of life components potential to them, and then a little bit on sort of some of the other aspects. And so I sort of walked from, solar system and then big picture things, people working on, dark matter and dark energy and such. My background is not in astrophysics, so I don't have a fabulous understanding in sort of those areas, but, it's definitely something that is of interest to people.
More like an invitational or introductory essay to this whole theme of astronomy and cosmology and that issue. Yeah,
that's correct. And there were 4 different articles that were submitted. One that dealt with parallel universes, one that dealt with faith-seeking understanding as an intellectual approach, one about the Bethlehem Star, and then one about one that was added. Sort of reflections for high school students and right. Such.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, so that explains also why you have more questions than answers in your article.
Yes. It was posed as this is an article to get people to submit papers to go into the issue.
But you've had a whole 2.5 years now to find the answers. Do you have them all?
No.
Not quite. Okay, they're grand questions, and you touched on so many issues here, which could occupy us for many hours. But Vicki, I'd like to open the microphones now so that we can get some discussion going. I'm sure a lot of the people here, we've got a good turnout here, have a lot of questions, and I think we will, as usual, start with those questions that were submitted in advance. And true to form, we continue to have Del Kuhn ask the first question. He's up here somewhere. Del, I think I saw you here, didn't I? Del, if you could unmute yourself, I think we'll do that.
As I said a second ago, I just unmuted, I believe, obviously incorrectly.
Yeah, anyway, there you are. I just couldn't see. All right.
I'm here. Anyway, thanks for the article. I enjoyed reading it, and I really appreciated the clarity of the way you presented your ideas and your questions. So I'd like to take you up on one area, and that's specifically discovery of life. And
Del, can you speak up? I don't know if it's my phone or what. I can't quite hear you. Maybe if you're closer.
Am I better like this? Am I better like this?
Sounds fine to me.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to ask about ramifications of the discovery of life. And I'm editing the question I send in case Randy has given it to you. But I'm explicitly excluding anything like a human type peer group with morals of civilization and just lower forms anywhere from algae up to mammals. I'm going to say that when we do make that discovery, it's going to be our opportunity to emphasize that Christianity is about the way God has interacted with us, and Christianity is not an axiomatic system of derivations, more like field biology than it will be mathematics. And I'm going to predict, without staking out a position, that many Christians are going to approach extraterrestrial life the way we approach evolution. It's about how God does things, not whether it's God that does things. And we will probably look at life then as an outcome of the way the universe is made, comparable to how we look at stellar formation and nuclear synthesis. So that's kind of my prediction, and I want to emphasize that Christianity is a reaction to God's actions, simply so we don't get ourselves into a God of the gaps with ever shrinking gaps. So my question, maybe on a lighter side, is what kind of questions or comments have you gotten back from students which were so off the wall they completely floored you that you never thought of asking? I guess I think that when we do discover life, many of us, myself included, are going to get blindsided by a question from a perceptive 12-year-old. And frankly, I'd like to get a running start on trying to figure out how to answer it. So what have you found what have people asked that you never thought they would? Thanks.
Good question. We do actually have a question in our textbook where we ask the students as part of our worldview section, if life was found elsewhere, how would that, impact your thinking about God? I'm actually it's been very interesting because some kids come back, very much like it would completely change my perspective. A lot of the kids that I think are most grounded, in other words, I have them do a long-term project where I have them tell me what they think their personal worldview is. Then they do sort of some research and they come back and they reiterate, yes, I agree with that. Or as they go through the year, students will develop once they've never really thought about, oh, what's my worldview? And then, oh, I really do like, where I'm going to land. The kids that I would say are more grounded are not really fazed by it. I think they do have that perspective like, okay, well, God could create life wherever he pleases. And so, it gives me a bigger view of God rather than a sense of, some sort of attack on my faith. I have other kids who will come back and sort of wrestle a lot more with that. And some kids that will come back and say, I don't think there's ever going to be anything found beyond the earth, and that they just stop there. I haven't had any kids like ask me something that was like completely off the wall. And granted, I'm working with juniors and seniors in high school primarily.
Okay.
But I think a lot of the students sort of have an assumption that life is going to be found someplace else. I thought it's been interesting sort of over the years. I've probably been doing this course 4 or 5 years now. The number of kids that just make that assumption. Yeah, we're going to find life elsewhere. And, no, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact in terms of my own faith. Okay. So, yeah.
All right.
I don't know if that completely answers your question, but.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Dale, you can always call. Let me just remind everyone that if you want to ask a question, make a brief comment, that click on the reactions button at the bottom and then on raise hand. So I will call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. And Fred Cannon was the next one. Raise your hand. Fred, good to see you again. Unmute yourself and ask your question. There we go.
Oh, Susan, that's a great topic in astronomy. So when my daughter was in grade school, actually, she had a thing to do in school of making a model of the planets. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, Amy, what you want to do is put in 10 planets and name one of them the unknown planet. Mm-hmm. Okay, then when, and she did, and she only got a 95 on that because she put in an extra planet. But later they found another, what they might be called a planet. Mm-hmm. And instead of giving it the name planet and making it so that she should have got 100%, they demoted Pluto. But anyway. So another time we were up in Algonquin and you could see all the stars of the sky. And we could see the Andromeda Galaxy, which is 2.5 million light years away. And I told my kids, okay, you can see right now something that we're seeing it as it was 2.5 million years ago. And that means that everything wasn't created just 6,000 years ago. So there's proof, right? As you can see it right up there right now in the sky, that this just didn't happen in the last 5 or 10 million or 5 or 10,000 years. Okay, so some people would take that and they would say, yeah, but God makes it so that we see the light now as if it came from millions of years ago, but he's a trickster. So we see it now, even though it just started 10,000 years ago. My guess is this has come up in your high school class. What's your response to that?
Yeah, so I have some students who are very, have actually done quite a bit of research on this and looked into different sort of alternative theories, for that. When I was a child growing up, I grew up in a Christian church, and the whole time issue really, in my experience, never really came up until I actually got into teaching homeschool students. And I guess from my perspective growing up, I just kind of had the perspective naively that God's character is not to deceive. And so if it's old, then it's legitimately old. And if it's young, that there's something scientifically that we're missing. In other words, that God's character and truth has to be consistent. What I read in scripture and what I see and measure in space. The only number that we use in space is related to time is the speed of light, which is a distance, right? And of course, it's a distance connected to a time. There have been some really interesting theories that have been proposed to get around the time issue, sort of the time dilation issue for a young Earth. And I'm not sure that I buy them all. I would say that the biggest issue that I have for the whole time thing, or that the students will bring up, is just how do you scientifically test different alternative hypotheses, right? So there's this idea that we're sort of on an event horizon, and effectively the light really is old, but it's really young, but it's reaching us faster or something like that. In any event, so there are different tricks that you can play about time to try to get back to that. Fundamentally, I think it it sort of belies the issue. To me, the issue is, did God create it, or did matter and energy always exist? There's sort of like these two positions that you can take. And so I think scientifically, when we look at various evidences, fine tuning and those sorts of things, it points to, in my opinion, it points to a creator. Does it point to the creator of the Bible? Maybe not explicitly. It points to that there's a designer behind it, rather than that matter and energy always existed. And so so when I'm teaching, when I'm working with my students, I'm trying to get them on that sort of level of understanding that creation can demonstrate God's power and who he is, and that time issue is maybe something that's sort of a secondary discussion point, but it's not something that you should land the plane on, so to speak. I don't know if that completely answers your question or not, but that's kind of where I try to direct that dialogue.
That's good. Okay. Thank you, Fred. Susan. Robert Mann is next. How you doing?
Oh, hi there. Yeah. Been a while since I've seen you, Randy. So, Susan, yes, I did think your article was very good to a large extent, because I think it goes beyond reactive and ventures more in a proactive direction. By which I mean, it's the notion of awe and wonder in astronomy is great. Everybody agrees with it, though. Even secular people. I have yet to meet an astronomer of any religious stripe that is not awed by the heavens. But I think we also need to go beyond gee whiz. Isn't God great? Isn't nature beautiful? And I think when you get to the issue of life, this is where the rubber is going to, there isn't a road, I suppose, but this is where we're going to get difficulties. And we know more now than we did. We know that planets are common. 30 years ago, we did not know this empirically. Right. It was quite conceivable that our solar system was rare. It's not. And yet it may be rare, because I think big planets far from the star are much less common than Jupiter's nearby. Am I right about that? That's my understanding.
Sorry, I was just thinking I could share a plot. I was thinking, I can show you a plot. Anyway, you can keep talking, but yeah. So initially, yes, we found lots of hot Jupiters close to the star, the parent star. We actually there's a whole slew of planets that have been found, and TESS is already discovering planets that are more sort of Earth-like habitable type planets as well. So yes, there are lots of planets out there, and the field was only discovered in 1992. So there's a lot more area, a lot more phase space to be looked at.
Okay, so that's fine. So we don't know yet how common or not Earths are, but let's go on. So I think the issues with life are threefold. First, it might be very rare. That's still possible, right? That life is for other reasons, even though there's lots of planets. And I think that matters theologically, whether it's rare or whether it's common somewhat. Comment two is there's a huge difference between sentient and non-sentient life as far as theology goes.
Definitely.
And I would contend that, if we find bacteria or, micro life pretty much, but not bigger life, and certainly not sentient, it's not going to be a really big deal. But if it's sentient, isn't it a really big deal? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, okay. And I think we should be proactive in thinking what it means, because the third thing we know for sure, unless you believe certain strange things, is no alien civilization has ever communicated with us. To the very best of we have zero communication. So if there is sentient life, either we're in quarantine or it's really, really, really hard to get them, for us to talk to each other. So to me, this raises issues of what is the role of revelatory particularity. For example, is Christ's death on the cross, is that a local phenomenon, good for Earth, but there are other plans for the cosmos or not? I mean, I regard that as an important question. What are your views?
Yeah, when I was writing that section, I love C.S. Lewis, and you're probably familiar with his Space Trilogy. And so it's very interesting because if you look at, his sort of perspective of that is that Earth itself, Thulcandra, was fallen, and that Melicandra and Paralandra were not. And yet we all live in the same universe, or, we're all part of the same system. And so I guess one of the questions might be that might be raised, this is probably a question rather than an answer, is that fallen nature of mankind, does it, transcend beyond? And we see, at least from a geological perspective, we see all these, same processes on all the other planets, cratering and earthquakes and volcanoes and all of that. Maybe that's all just part of the natural process. But anyway, I think it does. It raises some really interesting theological issues. And I have to, so I'll put this with a caveat, but I think it was Stephen Hawking who made the comment that, well, if we look at, sort of as different people have gone out in different places, there's more hostility between humans than there is, sort of peacemaking. And so if we encountered another civilization, would it be hostile or would it be peaceful, even in that regard? And so, we tend to sort of have these two perspectives. And one of my undergraduate advisors had always asked me the comment, because I had asked him that question as a believer, and he said, well, I guess one of the questions you could ask is, like, if we found sentient life, do they need a savior as well? Or is that idea of a savior unique to Earth? So yeah, I think those are all theological issues, but I'm not really sure how to answer them, so to speak.
Well, I appreciate the comment. And my point I'm trying to make probably to the wider audience than you is I think we should think more proactively. Not that we know the answers, we don't,
right.
But we should at least say, well, it might be this,
right.
Or it might be this, and it probably isn't X, but it is more likely to be Y, for example. I think the non-Christian community would take us much more seriously if we engaged in this kind of discussion instead of perpetually fighting about 6,000-year ages. That's my personal. I think that just makes us look foolish to the rest of the world.
Right.
Anyway, others have questions. I'll stop.
Okay, very good. And perhaps we need to keep in mind there could be several different forms of sentience. May not be just our kind. All right, let's move on. Joe Littner, good to see you again.
Hi, Susan. I'd like to hear your thoughts on manned exploration of the solar system and whether it justifies the cost.
I honestly don't. So I'm not sure how to answer that question. I don't have a strong feeling. Excuse me, just a second. I'm sorry. Sorry, my children it's transition time. Anyway, I think it is a huge expense. I think it is, at some level, I think it's inevitable that it's something that people will pursue. I think it's part of that sort of manifest destiny. But in terms of, does the cost justify the means or whatever, or the means justify the costs? That's way beyond my pay grade.
Mm-hmm. Well, Joe's question was about exploration, but what about?
I thought you meant manned exploration. Right,
manned exploration, right. And on the other hand is manned habitation. A lot of people are talking about the actual human living on the moon or working on the moon, which is another degree of expense well beyond simply sending humans out for exploration, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because there are definitely things that we could do. So right now, we've got the Hubble Space Telescope that's orbiting the Earth, and then James Webb Space Telescope just launched. I know you had asked about that. And so it is at Lagrange point, and there are different types of scientific experiments you can do from different locations. The New Horizons Telescope, which flew past Pluto and past Arrokoth, is in the middle of the Kuiper Belt. There are measurements we can take there of the Kuiper Belt itself in situ that we just can't get from the Earth, like just geometries you just cannot retrieve. And so fundamentally putting sort of unmanned situations or even manned things, you build a telescope on the moon, you don't have to deal with the atmosphere. Yeah, you got to deal with the whole lunar orbit and such. But I mean, there are things you can do there that you just can't do from the surface of the Earth. So obviously there's sort of some cost comparison, cost return comparison. But I think these are all things that, when Europe was sort of the place where everybody was starting, or Middle East and Europe, and then you find America, obviously there was this whole motion towards that because it was an unexplored region. Now, obviously, we can take pictures of all these different places in space, but there are obviously opportunities there if it was reachable that I don't think that man would limit itself against.
Good.
Is there any mineral on Mars that we can't already obtain on Earth?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not a Martian astronomer, so I can't say for sure, but I don't think so.
Okay, Terry, let's move on.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for your article. I'm a molecular biologist, biochemist, but my early interests while I was in high school was in astronomy, and Carl Sagan was a inspiration to me as a scientist. Not necessarily as a Christian or philosopher, but anyway, I've had great interest in these topics, and I appreciate your bringing me up to date on some of the latest things and explorations. So one sometimes we look at astronomy and with the to quote the Rick Wakeman rock album from the 1970s, "No Earthly Connection." But I want us to think about an earthly connection, and get you to comment on it. Your one of the things that jumped out at me in your article was your discussion of terraforming the moon and Mars and possibly other planets. And it made me think that we've actually terraformed the Earth, in terms of urban life, in terms of 50% of the nitrogen in the human body comes from the Bosch-Haber process. We've certainly terraformed the Earth with respect to fixable nitrogen, and if you look at the long-term agricultural aspect, I'm thinking about this for some other reasons right now too. We've modern day agriculture is not sort of the native Earth environment, and extinctions and whatnot. We can point to lots of things where human beings have terraformed the Earth itself, I just wanted you to maybe comment a little bit on that as you think about this question of terraforming and terraforming other planets, but also terraforming the Earth. Is this this call sometimes even by Christians to sort of get back to nature, back to the garden, seems to be contrary to the human way of doing things, that we inevitably alter our landscape. And so if you put Earth itself in the context of these other, Moon and Mars opportunities, just wonder if you want to think about that and muse with me about that. Okay. What do you think of that idea that we've actually terraformed the Earth? And we shouldn't be too surprised if we're thinking about terraforming the moon or Mars itself.
Yeah, I haven't thought too much about that, and I'm definitely not a biologist. I think it is interesting, sort of the whole idea of terraforming. And obviously, there are places like Biosphere 2, and I know there are people who are sort of trying to live in a Martian habitat to see, what it would be like to live on Mars, so to speak. When you were talking, it also made me think a little bit about, God's commission to us in Genesis to fill the earth and to subdue it, which really is to take care of it, not necessarily to, it's not to put it above God, but to care for the creation that God has given us. And so I guess one of the questions that I might pose back would be related to that, in that of, what does it mean to care for the earth how much does man, I mean, there's an exploitation, but there's also a caring component to it. And so there's obviously a balance there. And as believers, maybe we play some role in, sort of recognizing what that boundary is between, God's commission to care for things, and yet not put it above God, because obviously in a secular environment, when God is not honored, God isn't even in the picture. From a naturalistic perspective, it doesn't surprise me that those things would rise to the top. So I don't know if that's the direction that you expected I might go with that question, but those are just some thoughts. It is a really interesting question about, I don't think you could really terraform a whole planet. I don't think I think that's beyond human capability maybe, but, small areas where you could, have a base or whatever. Obviously there's lots of science fiction ideas about that, but sometimes science fiction isn't that far off the beaten path, right? A lot of these things that were written about in the 50s became reality, now. With my students, I actually have them read science fiction novels. And then I say, okay, when was the novel written? What did they, perceive might happen in the future? And what of those things have actually transpired? Right? So like how space it will travel. He goes to Pluto and he lives on Pluto. He takes his typewriter with him. Didn't foresee the whole, process of computers. And yet, that idea of traveling to other planets obviously was in there. And we see that a lot in science fiction today. So.
Right. We have that, that Star Trek movie.
Yes.
Where Spock comes back to life after the planet was terraformed. And
exactly. The whole Genesis project, right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Very
good. Well, thank you.
Hall. Let's move on to Steve Hall. Unmute yourself. Okay, your turn.
Okay, I have two questions. They're just kind of general questions for Susan, just short ones. I'm curious what your opinion is, how close we are to finding life on another planet or out in the solar system, out in the universe. And my second question is on wanting to see Christian young people go into the sciences. I know you mentioned that earlier. Wanting to see them engage their faith in these cutting edge fields in science. And what do you believe is roadblocking them from wanting to do that or being able to do it effectively?
Okay, so for the first one, I honestly don't know. I know, so in the field of exoplanets, there's this goal of finding sort of an Earth twin, so to speak. Jennifer was commenting about the most common planet in our galaxy seems to be super Earth size than Earth, but smaller than Neptune. And I don't really know what the sensitivity levels of tests are because I know that's sort of the next best tool. And JWST, I think, will also be doing some of these, searching for things. So there's sort of that component of it. In terms of finding what we would call extremophile life. So if you look on Earth, and actually in our textbook, there's a whole list. I think there's 10 different types of extremophiles. So we find life in really strange places on the Earth, places where you wouldn't expect to find it, right? Like underneath the pole in Antarctica, or in the hydrothermal vents, at the bottom of the ocean, or in Yellowstone geysers and stuff like that. So at some level, the idea of finding some sort of microbial life someplace, I don't think would super surprise me. Because God has created creatures that can survive in all sorts of strange environments. And so who am I to limit that? So I guess that's as far as I can take that. In terms of young people in the sciences, so the thing that I think is most important, and maybe this isn't exactly answering that question, but the thing that I think is most important is that students or young people of faith need to be well versed in what they believe and why they believe it, so that when they get into these environments that are, either compromising or maybe not compromising, but that are really pressing on, why do you believe that? Why is that so important to you? That they're enough grounded in what they believe and why they believe it, that they're not derailed. In other words, not that they're not phased, that they don't wrestle with it. Because I think everybody experiences doubt, and everybody, I think that's part of our walk with God. Like we sort of get that plateau, and then you keep going, and then there's something else that comes up. You say, oh yeah, I got to wrestle with that. And then you work through that. And so I think it's, to me, one of the things that I sort of always had this perspective of was that if I could be a good scientist, that then maybe people would listen to other things that I had to say, like the fact that my faith is really important to me. And there's actually been a really interesting movie that was just put together, and I don't think it's completely public yet, but I did sort of a preliminary viewing on it, called Illuminous. And it's about a professor, Larry. He works at Calvin College, and I'm gonna blow it on his name. But anyway, and it's sort of his discoveries. Yes, thank you, Larry Milner. And so it's sort of it's a combination of his faith journey and his science journey, and how his faith undergirds everything he does. So it's his character that comes out, and it shows how the scientific method works and doesn't work, or how it really is supposed to work. And how in humility, when we find things in science that disagree with what we proposed, recognizing that and then walking forward in that, and even seeing where you can go from that. It's that undergirding of your character that I think that speaks the most. And so I think in terms of young people, I know this is a long answer, I'm sorry. In terms of young people going into science, that they need to be grounded in what they believe and why they believe it. And then really just, your character shows itself in being good at what you do, I think speaks volumes in that regard.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Richard, how are you?
Well, thank you for doing this. It's an interesting discussion. I have a question for Susan. Is how much do you have any background in the earth sciences?
A little.
Okay. I'm wondering, in the group that's assembled here today, how many there are. I'm betting there aren't too many. And there probably aren't. I don't know if there are any others. I'm a mineralogist.
Okay.
I'm a geologist, a mineralogist, a petrologist, somebody who can tell you hopefully how rocks originated. And I just spent a week, this last week, participating or auditing really the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Happens once a year, and thousands of papers are presented by hundreds of people, and it makes your head hurt. There's so much going on there. But one of the things that I realize every time I get involved in a discussion like this is there aren't many people who understand what the universe tells us. They understand what the universe tells us from their perspective, but they don't have a broad
perspective,
background in it. And one of the things that came out, one of the things that there was a whole session devoted to was basically the age of the solar system. And then, well, what did that mean? And in case anyone's interested, it's 4.568 billion years. Now, if that's true, if the solar system is that old, then the solar system didn't get started until after 9.2 billion years of the universe had gone by. And our solar system is made at 4.568 billion years. It's made of stuff that was hanging around in space for 9.2 billion years. Now, you've got to respect that something must have happened in those previous 9.2 billion years before our solar system even got started. And so I adhere to what a friend, acquaintance of mine, Guy Consolmagno, who's the Vatican astronomer, says. We're made to study. We are created to study this. And our studying of this is worship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that we know what it tells us. Science is meant to be it's like a crime scene.
Mm-hmm.
You walk up to science and you put the tape around it. And then you start investigating all the possible minor things. And I guess the point I'm trying to make, and Bob Geddes will understand when I say this, is that people don't look at rocks very often, and they don't look at them in great detail. And there are certain rocks that come to us from space. They're called meteorites, and some of us look at them in detail. And these are some of the conclusions that we come to. But
so Richard, do you have a question for Susan?
I do.
Yeah,
What do you think the age of the universe and our solar system is? Because I think that's fundamental, and it makes us think about processes that have happened in the past. So, what
is your view of the age?
Yeah, so I think I sort of went along. I sort of started out on this. So I grew up, and I've always had the perspective of an old Earth. From an astronomer perspective, from the speed of light, that seems reasonable. I have some doubts about different radioactive dating methods, but fundamentally, I really kind of feel like I'm ambivalent about whether it's old or young. I think I would say God could create it however long he wanted to take it to create. If he wanted to create it with a short time frame and make things, happen quickly, he's capable of doing that. If he wants to, use what we observe scientifically, 14.6, whatever, that's fine with me too. I think the point that to me is more important is the fact that he's given us his creation to study, both geologically and in the heavens. I should go back, and I attended LPSC this week remotely, sort of. I ran a session, and I should go back and listen to that particular session since I have access to it. I will do that. But the fact that God gave us creation and that we can study God's creation, that's part of understanding who God is. So I think whatever time frame you put on that is fine. But I think just the idea that, if you look at the history of science, the reason people studied science initially was because if you look at Newton and others, they studied science because they expected that they'd see order in nature. They knew the creator. They made that prerogative. They made that assumption. God is the creator. Therefore, we should find order in this. That's some of those assumptions that science is based on. And so fundamentally, it helps us to see who God is. And I have my children love looking at rocks. That in our homeschool communities, we pull out all sorts of different geodes and other things all the time. And the kids love poking through those because there's so much beauty and so much detail in those things. My kids can hold a rock from a meteorite and say, wow, this came from someplace else. Just the fact that you can get something off the surface of an asteroid and send it all the way across space through the atmosphere, land on the Earth and pick it up and measure it. That's amazing. And so I think there's that's all part of God's fingerprints in that.
Well, Susan, can I follow up with a age of the universe question here?
Sure.
I was under the understanding that the age of the universe was really well established to a high degree of accuracy at, what is it, 13.78 or something like that billion years. But I recall a headline about a year ago or so that some group ended up with a number about a billion years different from that. I don't know, it was 14.8 or which way it went. And I never heard about that again. Was there a legitimate controversy that's still not resolved, or was that just a fluke of a bad measurement? Does anyone?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. Jennifer, any of you others on
Deborah,
here?
Robert, some of you guys. Is there any such deviation?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, there's a headline about a year ago about a group that supposedly had a reliable method on approach to the age of the universe. It differed from the standard, well-known, certain 13.78 billion by almost a billion years. Now, I don't know if that was a rogue outfit or is there a real question to be resolved?
I think that number always gets refined at some level, but I don't know the details. Yeah, Jennifer, thoughts?
Yeah, but this was more than a...
So there's two main ways in astrophysics right now to look at the age of the universe, actually there's more than two, but one of them is looking at the leftover, the background radiation, the cosmic background radiation left over from the Big Bang, if you will, that's filling the universe, and studying that. And the other is to look more closer to our own epoch of cosmic time and look at supernovae going off in nearby galaxies and gauging from them how far away those galaxies are and measuring their radial velocities. Anyway, getting an expansion rate for the universe right now and kind of comparing that with models of the universe to come up with an age. And those two approaches, either looking at kind of the current universe or looking at leftover radiation from the background, from the beginning of the universe, give you a slightly different age or even expansion rate of the universe, which gives you a slightly different age. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, Randy, but nevertheless, we're still talking of in the same ballpark of 13 point something billion years of age. And I think the interesting thing that was just mentioned, though, about the fact that the Earth is not 13.8 billion years old. The Earth appears to be 4.5 billion years old. Right. So the point here is that our Earth and our solar system is taking advantage of previous generations of stars that have come and gone and have created these heavier elements that have got swept up into our own solar system when our own solar system was formed. So we're benefiting from previous generations of stars, and I find that awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, sorry about that. Paul Arbison's got the next thing, so go ahead.
Yes, Susan, thank you so much for being here, for sharing with us. To me, probably one of the most important apologetics is simply the existence of people like you who are astrophysicists, astronomers with MIT degrees. And that is just such an encouraging thing to see this. And that's why I love the ASA so much, because I get to meet people like you. And I've recently read Max Tegmark's book, Our Mathematical Universe. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you've had any conversations with him. He is not, vigorously anti-religious. It's intriguing. He's a very creative guy. And I just wondered if you have can tell us anything about the culture at MIT in terms of other Christians that you may have had in a fellowship, or other conversations you may have had with some of those professors?
So let's see. So one thing, a couple thoughts here. One, actually, the idea of sort of people who can inspire the next generation, that was part of the reason why we put these interviews in the textbook, because we wanted young students to see that there are people who have made scientific careers and are also Christians, and that it's possible to be both. It's an outflow of who we are to study God's creation. And at whatever level, right? If that's astronomy or geology or biology or chemistry or whatever it might be. And so that idea there. In terms of, at MIT, there are a variety of different fellowships. So I was part of the Christian Fellowship group, which was, I think we're connected to Campus Crusade, which is now Cru. And so, there were a number of students in different departments, and we get together, for fellowship, and also just to, share what we were doing. In the particular department that I was in the Earth and Planetary Sciences department. And actually all of the professors on our floor, not all of them, large number of the professors on our floor were connected to churches. My particular advisor was not, but we had a lot of, sort of dialogue because he knew it was an important part of who I was. And so, at some level, you obviously have to be careful in an academic environment where you go with conversations. But when those questions come up, on a one-on-one, conversational level, it's perfectly reasonable to have those conversations. And so it gives you opportunities to, reflect God.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Jennifer, now we'll get your chance to ask your question.
Okay. Susan, I really appreciate you doing this today. kind of being on the hot seat to let us all think deeply about the kinds of things you wrote about. So my question is, in your own field of study and research, your own expertise, what are you most excited about in the coming years? What are the most interesting questions people in your field are investigating, and what are the most interesting missions or techniques that you're looking forward to in the coming years in this decade in your field?
So my particular field is small bodies in the solar system. I focus on specifically everything sort of outside of Neptune. So I'm looking at the Kuiper Belt, Pluto, comets. Right now, New Horizons is a spacecraft that's going through the Kuiper Belt. And so we've been able to take observations there that we just can't take from the ground. So we're learning a lot about those objects. The Kuiper Belt, as well as the asteroids, are thought to have been just sort of background information for other people, since you might know this already, Jennifer, but are thought to be sort of the primordial parts of our solar system. So if you take the solar system forming in a solar nebula, you get the giant planets, but then the small bodies are all the leftovers. So they're sort of all the you can, if you go to an archaeological site, you dig out and you get the pot shards, and, you can look at a fire and you can see what people ate, those sorts of things. So the Kuiper Belt is sort of that piece of it. And we also are aware of, comets that come in from strange locations. And actually at LPSC this last week, there was a number of presentations about this R2 comet. It was one of the comets that was most recently discovered that had a high level of not CO, but something else, nitrogen maybe. Anyway, it was very unusual. And so one of the modeling questions was, well, where did this come from? Can you use this particular constraint as a timing for when the solar system formed or when the giant planets migrated, those sorts of things? And so I think because there are a lot of large surveys that are coming into front. So the Vera Rubin Observatory, or people might be more familiar with LSST, is this observatory that's going to be taking pictures of the entire sky every 5 days, basically, in 5 filters, time domain stuff, as well as for a 10-year baseline. So that's just an example. But we've also got, these buildings for large telescopes from the ground, as well as JWST. So I think these large data sets that can be harvested, looking back in time or looking at different aspects of, different steps in time that you can try to then put pieces together. Obviously, in science, we do a lot of modeling, so you might not have a unique solution, but there are, from the NEAS model, which was first proposed for sort of how our giant planets moved around in the solar system and the small bodies got in place, is being refined over time. Not that it's the definite answer, but there are so many constraints now that the model proposes. You can actually go out and make observations and say, does this match or not? Okay, it matches, then this works, or no, we have to go tweak the model, or you can specify it a lot more. And so just that whole idea of getting a better understanding perhaps of these different things. And I'm sure that there are realms in, extrasolar planets or in galactic astronomy where these same sorts of things can be done. I think it'll be really interesting to see sort of what these large databases or sets of observations do for our general understanding. There was a whole revolution in biology when, the DNA projects were begun in RNA and studies and stuff like that sort of took biology a much deeper understanding. And you can see so much detail there of God's design. And so I think, those things will happen in the astronomy realm as well, with some of these larger data sets.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much.
Let's move on. Bob?
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much, Susan. Just a follow-up, maybe just for a little clarification in my own mind. You expressed some ambivalence to the age of the Earth, and sort of said that, I think you said any time frame is fine. I believe that those are your words. So do you have the same sense as far as the age of the universe, or for the small bodies in the universe or in the solar system that is the nature of your study, or and is the age of the Earth then kind of a red herring, or just its factual basis doesn't impact your work? So I just wanted to
clarify that.
Seek a little clarification on that.
Yeah. So I guess my point in saying that is from a from a spiritual perspective, I don't want to put God in a box to say it has to be this or it has to be that. I think that God can choose to create in his own time frame, and that it's not necessarily my prerogative to know what that time frame is. And that I think there are ways that you can consistently interpret scripture at some level and consistently interpret science and have sort of a coherent, rational explanation for the timescale on either of those frameworks. In terms of one of the experiments I would really like to do, and I have not had the opportunity to do this, but one of the things I sort of toy with is the idea is we have all these models that allow us to run, long ages and timescales and all of that. And because everything in sort of the mainstream science is based on, the 14 billion year timescale, and that's fine. I've always wanted to sort of try some of these models and say, if you tweak the timescales or if you tweak some of these things, right, we know the different constants, that there's like some 35, 40 constants that if you tweak them at all, right, then you don't get life at all, right? So this whole fine tuning idea. And so obviously, if things are so fine tuned, if one of those numbers, as we measure it is wrong, what does that mean to everything else, right? I mean, I'm not going to say that I know that or not, but anyway, so it's sort of from a philosophical sort of scientific perspective, I kind of wonder, like, what would it be, if I could take the same model and run it with a completely different time scale, would I get anything close to what, if you just compact everything, so to speak. But I think it's the difference between separating sort of the theological perspective and the scientific perspective. So in my work and in my field of research, I have no issue with a long time scale. Like that doesn't, I don't have that question with everybody else, with others. And I think that there have been, some questions posed by young Earth people who have some legitimate questions. One of the things that I find that I really appreciated a couple of years ago was when I went to a New Horizons conference where people were talking about the new work on Pluto. When we first flew past and we're looking at the surface and such. And one of the gals presenting says, these are the assumptions I started with. This is the age of Pluto system. This is this. And then one of the conclusions was, gosh, everything looks really young on the surface of Pluto. Like, what's the mechanism to have it be young in that sense? And young in this case was a couple billion years, but it wasn't the 4.5 billion years of the whole solar system that we didn't think about. So I think fundamentally, the only thing that I see in science is I think it's important for us to put our assumptions out there. So if there are timescales, in terms of timescales, like just based on what is the timescale based on? So in the case of the age of the universe, it's the speed of light, right? That's the metric that we have. If that's the metric we're measuring with, you use it, right? You don't question it. You simply use it because then you can, pursue all these other questions. So it's sort of to me, it's sort of a mechanism or a method for being able to do that research. I don't know if that completely answered your question, but.
Well, it's, I appreciate the answer that you gave it. I think it's a terribly critical question in the whole science and faith front, our grasp of the age of the Earth and the age of the universe and how we work with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important issue. I think it's just the fact that it can be so controversial that there are people from the young Earth framework who will basically argue with you that you can't be a Christian if you have an old Earth perspective. And so I don't find that very fruitful in terms of either the theological or the scientific discussion, because it ends up being a bottleneck from being able to go deeper on either level. And so I've just had to sort of put that on hold, so to speak, with certain things, because I just don't find that it's fruitful. And I think it's more important to be fruitful in our discussions.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Okay. So this means I get the last question since nobody else raised their hand. So Susan, you alluded to the Webb telescope, and I think it's safe to say that the vast majority, if not everyone here, has been following the Webb telescope, but we're all excited about the results. So I ask you personally, are there any specific things that you're looking forward to obtaining information from the Webb that would either be part of your work or be of particular interest to you? What specific result are you looking for?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. So Webb has been going for, in progress for so long. We were really excited when it finally launched. And I was looking
I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, Jennifer, that'd be a great person to ask. anyway, so we're working for so long to see this happen, and I kind of, wow, it's actually happening. And so just as an update, so it seems to be, launched, it's in place, and all the mirrors are sort of being put into their optimal positions now. So things seem to be working the way that they were expecting them to. And Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong on any things that I'm not familiar with yet. In terms of scientific discoveries, obviously in astronomy, they sort of get put into different categories. So there's sort of the astrophysics, there's the planetary, there's the exoplanets, there's different categories. There's the galactic science. In my particular field in the Kuiper Belt, one of my collaborators actually has a large proposal. It's about 100 hours, I think, staring into a specific part of the Kuiper Belt. So we know that the Kuiper Belt is basically, most of it exists along the plane of the solar system. And, but we know that there are obviously, so one of the questions is sort of, is it thick or is it just completely flat? And, how many objects are there? Are there objects beyond certain? So for the longest time, we've sort of had the sense that there's a cutoff at the edge of our solar system of about 50 astronomical units, not a particular cliff per se, but that there's some transition, some change. And that's fundamental to sort of the models for solar system formation, sort of, was our disk truncated when it formed or, whatever. And so they basically, with this program, they will be looking, specifically for those small, faint objects that we haven't been able to access with telescopes yet. We've tried some deep searches with Hubble, and we haven't really been found those sorts of things. So I think that particular project will really give us a fundamental better understanding of the Kuiper Belt. But I know that there are a lot of other projects, related to extrasolar planets and such that will be probably even more transformative.
Okay, so Jennifer, jump in. She says there's something Hubble couldn't do. So you're waiting for Webb to provide that, right?
Hubble can only get down to 27th magnitude. JWST is going to go to 30.
Yeah. So these two observatories are really going to be very complementary because the Webb telescope sees farther into the infrared part of the spectrum than Hubble can achieve. And so this is terrific because it means when you're trying to look at the earliest galaxies in the universe, those galaxies, Hubble can't even see some of those infant galaxies because the light coming from them gets very redshifted as it travels through expanding space to get to us. And sometimes that light, even if it started out as blue or even ultraviolet light, by the time it gets to us, it's been shifted deeply into the infrared, sometimes beyond what Hubble can see. So the Webb telescope as an infrared telescope will be great and very sensitive at picking up some of these infant galaxies. We're talking about, we've been talking about that. If you're following the chat here, Robert Mann is reminding us that we know to great precision the age of the universe. That's 13 let me see if I've got his number here, 13.787 billion years. But we're now seeing these infant galaxies from that first, from within that first 0.787 billion year history of the universe. We're seeing back to very close, cosmically speaking, to the beginning of the universe when galaxies first started assembling. And Hubble can see some of those, but Webb will see even better. So we're looking forward to that. But we need Hubble in complement because Hubble sees the visible light and the ultraviolet light that Webb cannot see. And that helps us understand galaxies all through cosmic history. And then closer to home in our own galaxy, the Webb and its infrared capabilities can see into these circumstellar disks around stars where planets are forming and can see into these interstellar clouds where stars and their planets form. To some extent, Hubble does that too, but seeing deeper into the infrared will give us complementary information. And finally, Webb and Hubble together will give us the full spectra of exoplanet atmospheres. And that tells us what the composition of is in these exoplanets that we're discovering by the thousands outside our solar system. We want to know what their atmospheres are like. And so we need both Hubble and Webb to give us that compositional information. So complementary is the name of the game for Webb and Hubble.
Jennifer, I also think too that some of the when the large telescopes actually do come online, I don't know how the timing is going to go with that, but does Hubble survive long enough to do all these things, the 30-meter telescope, so to speak, even though they're ground-based? I think they will also nicely balance with JWST because they're sensitive. Again, everybody's sensitive in these different wavelengths, and you really want like sensitivity across all the wavelengths to get those pictures. One of the things I show in my classes for my students is, here's Venus in 4 different wavelengths, or here's the Milky Way galaxy in 6 different wavelengths, and how you use all that complementary information to get a bigger perspective of what you're seeing. So, all of those different things.
Yeah, it's neat. Well, with Jennifer in charge of
that's the ultra deep field.
Make sure it lasts a long.
We're going to try to make Hubble last at least through the end of this decade and maybe even beyond. So, hopefully we'll have it all. Yeah.
I'm so delighted, Jennifer, that it's been working so far. I was so pessimistic about it.
Yeah, this true engineering fashion, it can't possibly work because there's too many.
Yeah. So Kathy gave me this Hubble Deep Field.
It's a great outfit you've got there, Paul. Very nice. Very nice.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. We're running fairly late here, but Susan, do you have any final thought you want to leave with all of us?
Oh, I should have thought about that.
I didn't warn you of that one.
Well, I just thank you for everyone's, contributions. Great discussion. And I think the thing that I try to remind my students is that, in terms of the science faith component, right, it's not either or, it's how God allows us to use both to see deeper into who he is. I think I alluded to this, and maybe you asked me this personally, but just I see in all of these studies sort of it's because of my relationship with God, I see all of his attributes as I study. And so, just the fact that, we can use creation to help us go deeper in our relationship with the Lord. I think that's something that's really can't be belittled.
Okay, so once more, Susan, thank you very much for writing this article, and thank you, the rest of you, for a great discussion. And look forward to seeing all of you on April 9 for next month. Thank you very much.